Hi, I'm Fumi OK. You're watching the stream. When you think about it, it's extraordinary that we have COVID-19 vaccines produced in record time. Where we're not doing quite so well as a world is the distribution and the manufacture of these vaccines in an equitable manner. Developing countries are most definitely losing out. But what if a country like India was allowed to manufacture generic COVID vaccines and the pharmaceutical companies waived their patents? That is a controversial suggestion. I would love you to weigh in. We're about to have that debate. YouTube is waiting for your comments so you can be part of today's episode.
As a doctor, I want my patients to be safe. And that doesn't mean just them being vaccinated themselves. That means them getting to live in a world where their families, where their loved ones, where a global community is vaccinated.
At this stage of the pandemic, with over 2.5 million people dead, the only sensible approach is to have a people's vaccine. This doesn't just mean suspension of intellectual property rights. It should also mean compulsory technology transfer so that manufacturers of vaccine give the trade secrets and technologies required to manufacture vaccines to others that could do the same elsewhere in the world. 9 out of every 10 people in the global south facing having no access at all in 2021. We need to look at other ways that we can expand access to vaccines globally. These vaccines should be treated as a global public good.
So that is the problem. Do we have solutions? Hello, Madhavi. She's in the US. Dr. Anant in Bhopal, India, and Rachel in Washington, D.C. Highly qualified guests to talk to you about this issue. Madhavi, tell our audience who you are and what you do.
I'm Madhavi Sunder. I am a professor of law at Georgetown University Law Center, and my area of specialty is intellectual property.
Dr. Anant, good to see you back on the stream. You're almost our personal physician. Thanks for coming back. Remind our audience who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. My name is Anand Bhan. I'm a researcher in global health, bioethics, and health policy, and I'm based in Bhopal, Central India. Thank you.
Good to have you. And hello, Rachel. Welcome to the stream. Introduce yourself to our global audience.
Hello, I'm Rachel Silverman. I'm a policy fellow at the Center for Global Development, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent think tank in Washington, D.C., and I focus on global health policy and financing.
Guess I would love to hear from you just very briefly. How serious a situation are we in terms of equitable distribution of vaccine today, right now, a year after we've had a global pandemic? Madhavi, you start. How bad is it?
Well, sure. In the United States, we got great news from President Biden a couple weeks ago. He said every adult in the U.S. would be vaccinated by the end of May. But what's horrible and really truly unconscionable is at this point, out of about 400 million vaccines that have been distributed worldwide, 90% of those have gone to people in rich countries. And many experts at this point say that the middle and lower income countries won't be vaccinated until about 2023 or 2024. So we have an incredible inequity here.
That's a wake-up call. Dr. Anant, how are you doing in India?
Well, India, as you know, is one of the major producers of vaccines in global health. But even with that, and with domestic manufacturing capacity being fairly good, we are struggling in terms of vaccine supply. We've just about managed to get first 2 groups starting to get vaccinated, so frontline health workers and other sorts of first response workers involved. Now we've started off with the elderly and those with comorbidity, but given the scale of our population, getting enough vaccine coverage would require many more doses to be available and a more aggressive program. And I think there is certainly a supply problem, which we all need to talk about. So the fact that there are many rich countries which have a higher access to vaccines, and there are poorer countries where even a few priority populations cannot get any access to vaccines is a deeply troubling ethical issue, which
Right.
I think is a major issue for global health now.
Rachel, I am going to play to you a little bit of an interview that Winnie Binyama gave Al Jazeera English, and that was back on March the 10th. She's the executive director of UNAIDS. This is what she said about the COVID-19 vaccines. Have a listen.
When the AIDS epidemic was at its height and people were dying, antiretrovirals were found that they could put people on a long and healthy life and live with the virus, but without dying. People in poor countries, 10 million people in poor countries died before the prices came down and the vaccine and the treatment was available for them. This doesn't have to be the case, but unfortunately it is so. Like you've just said, today, the fundamental problem is that the supply, the doses being made are not enough to go around the world. This is a global problem needing a global solution, but a vaccine apartheid has been created.
Rachel, vaccine apartheid. Are we in vaccine apartheid right now? And will perhaps pushing the pharmaceutical companies to open up a little bit, is that the way forward?
So certainly there's quite a bit about her comments that are accurate and ethically trouble, as the previous two guests have said. So we are seeing these extreme inequities in who is getting the vaccine, and we are seeing an accelerated timeline in the United States and the UK, to a lesser extent Europe, but still far, far faster and beyond what's going to be likely in most of the developing world. And those inequities are reminiscent of historical examples like HIV treatment, which became available in the United States years before it was available broadly in Africa and Asia, and many, many people died as a result. So I think the broad situation that she's laying out is accurate, it's correct, and it demands action and attention to remedy. However, there are some important differences between the HIV situation and the current situation that we're in. As she points out, the problem right now is a supply problem. There is not enough vaccine to go around. And given that that's the case, the wealthier countries that have more money, that were quicker getting to the front of the line, that subsidize some of the research and development, have the vast majority of the doses. And we need to expand global manufacturing capacity. But unlike HIV drugs, which are basically a simple chemical compound that can be replicated fairly simply by any generic producer if patents are not in place, vaccines, they're a much more complicated manufacturing process. And so it's not just enough to say, waive the patent, and therefore we can go out and make it and you won't sue us, and really that's all we need, that we won't be sued for copying your intellectual property. We actually need the know-how, the processes, what the technology transfer, as someone else you played earlier said, which is when the pharma companies actually go into a generic producer, help them set up their manufacturing lines, and show them how to do it. Now, we are seeing a bit of that through voluntary licensing deals. So there is already manufacturing happening in India, in Canada, and South Korea, and other countries through these voluntary licensing and tech transfer procedures. Okay. But we need more of that.
Madhavi, I want you to talk to us as the sort of international public here about what it means for a pharmaceutical company to waive their patent, because this is what India and South Africa are suggesting, that they make generic vaccines for COVID-19. What does that actually mean, and is that a good thing?
It would be a great thing, and it's critical to increasing in vast numbers the supply of the vaccines, which is what we need. So right now, a patent means the drug maker has the exclusive right to make the drug and to sell that vaccine, in this case, at a monopoly price. These monopoly prices are enough to pay for the initial investment in making the vaccine, but much more than that as well. And so if, as India and South Africa are arguing, patent owners agree to waive their rights now, then we could see manufacturers around the world, India primarily, which is known as the pharmacy to the developing world. They've got incredible capacity to make high quality, safe, affordable generic vaccines. But there are, in fact, manufacturers around the world, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, in South Africa, and in Brazil, for example, that stand at the ready. Some are already reaching out to the owners of these patents, such as Moderna and Pfizer, saying, we can make, if you can help us with some of the technology transfer, we can start retrofitting our factories to start making 600 to 800 million vaccines within a matter of months, and start getting that delivery out in 2021, which is so critical. So waiving the patent is important so these companies can know they're not going to be sued if they start copying the recipe for these vaccines that work. But as I think Rachel said, it's also so important that the drug companies not just share the recipe, but they also give the know-how and help these companies learn how to make these vaccines safely for wider populations. But it's not just on the drug manufacturers. The last point I'll make is that, in fact, there are a number of folks from the World Health Organization and other experts that stand at the ready. They have volunteered themselves to help in that crucial process of technology transfer so we can get more drug manufacturers around the world making these vaccines in hundreds of millions in terms of those numbers.
Madhavi, I hear you. Dr. Nat, I want to show you something. This is a letter. I'm just going to call them Big Pharma because they're really big pharmaceutical companies. That these companies sent a letter to the President of the United States. Have a look here. There are 5 pages of this letter. I highlighted a little bit that really jumped out at me. Unfortunately, in October, India and South Africa formally proposed to the World Trade Organization Council for Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights to suspend critical intellectual property provisions. And this is of an agreement which is basically a patent agreement, which means that for a number of years, I'm going to keep scrolling here because I want you to see the impressive signatures, a number of years that they hold on to the patent. They don't have to share it with anybody, which means for a number of years, they get to make the money. Look at these companies, Eli Lilly and Company, Pharma, keep going here, Takeda, Novartis, huge, Bayer, wow. Biogen, and keep going. Astellas Pharma. I'm going to let you can read for yourself. These are huge companies. They do not want their patent waived for COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Anand, you say what to those big pharma companies?
So Femi, I'm not surprised. They have a clear conflict of interest. Obviously, profits are important to any corporation, including pharmaceutical corporations. But, at the end of the day, we have to remember this is not an academic debate. There are lives at stake. There have actually already been millions of lives lost. And there are many, many people who are waiting for these vaccines to be delivered to them. And as I was saying earlier, there are many countries which have hardly gotten even a handful of vaccines, whereas there are other countries which have a lot of vaccines and probably enough vaccines to cover their citizens many times over. And isn't that an issue we need to talk about? The pharma companies obviously should be part of that discussion, but we have to look at the larger access issue and wonder why is it that we are not able to sort this out. And if it takes too long, then we are going to again have a situation where as variants come through, as more disease and infection is spreading in many countries, including in India right now, we will have situations where the health systems might again crumble in the way we have seen them crumble last year in many LMICs. And we don't want that situation to happen. If vaccines are available now and there are other mechanisms of increasing production, we should make that happen. And yes, pharma companies should have a voice at that table, but it should also be health systems and those who are most impacted by this pandemic who should be speaking out. And it's also important, I think, to reinforce that public money has gone into the R&D of these vaccines. So it's not as if only pharma companies have put in money for the R&D part. In India, in the US, there's been a lot of money put in, which is basically our own tax money, which has gone into helping expedite the development of these vaccines. And if that is true, then why is it that we should not expect pharma companies to be more cooperative in terms of enhancing access?
All right, so let me put this to you, guests. Let me show this to you here on my laptop. There's a country's positions on waiving monopolies for COVID-19 medical tools. Have a look here. This comes from Doctors Without Borders. And let me just help you out here with the legend. Full supporter of waiving this whole patent, green. General supporter, green. Let me take you to the orange, though. Opponents of sharing COVID vaccine noise. It can be generic. You can see where in the world they are. A lot of Western developed countries, Australia here, a little bit in South Korea as well. Madhavi, you are shaking your head. We can see very clearly who wants to share and who doesn't in a global pandemic.
Yeah, I would just say, as my teenage daughter would say, it's not a good look. I mean, those countries that are at the front of the line that have bought enough doses for their populations and then some are saying, no, we're not going to share the patents, the recipes, or the know-how. And, I just wanted to add on this, the letter that you pointed out from the heads of all of these pharmaceutical companies. In many cases, pharmaceutical companies are the poster child for patents. We want to incentivize these companies to create those breakthrough medicines and drugs. The issue, though, here is that actually, in the context of these major vaccines that we're seeing from Moderna and Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, it was not the pharmaceutical companies that took the risk, but rather, as Dr. Anand says, in the United States, it was Operation Warp Speed and government investment in the terms of billions of dollars. In fact, for the Moderna vaccine, it was 100% paid for by U.S. taxpayers. So in this particular case, not only are we in an unprecedented once-in-a-century pandemic, but in fact, the government of the United States has incredible leverage because this is the people's vaccine. The people paid for these vaccines, and we must be able to use that leverage to say, that's why the drug companies have to not just share the recipe, but teach those manufacturers around the world that stand at the ready to learn and quickly retrofit their factories to make the billions of doses that we need to get out there quickly. And as Dr. Anand also said, we're in a race against time because even if we vaccinate and have herd immunity in the developed world, in the meantime, variants from South Africa, Brazil, and other parts of the world are now coming into all corners of the world and threatening to undermine our success with our vaccine campaign. So this is, as we've known from the beginning, it's a global problem. And no one of us is safe until all of us are safe.
So, Guess, I have some YouTube comments for you. Audience are watching you and they have questions for you. I'm going to ask you for very brief responses to this. So this is Daryl D'Souza. This is for you, Dr. Anand. What percentage increase in global vaccine distribution do you think manufacturing in India could lead to?
Well, if we were able to leverage all the production capacity which exists in India, so many of the other manufacturers who are right now trying to figure out clinical trials to get their products out, if they could just focus on manufacturing in the capacity that they have, I could easily see at least a doubling of capacity in the near future from India if we really leverage all of those. So that really could make a huge difference to India and to many other nations.
All right, let me put this one to you, Rachel. What's the point of giving away the patent? Won't we be getting rid of the incentive for pharma companies? That may have come from a pharmaceutical company, because that is their argument. We did all the work, and now you want us to give away the vaccine?
Well, I think, I think there are two questions here. One question is the patent per se, and the other question is the sharing, knowledge transfer, licensing. So, I might differ somewhat from the other two guests on this program in that I think the patents themselves are a little bit of a side issue. I think they're an important symbolic gesture to say, certainly on behalf of companies, to waive their patents, to say, we will not sue you. We recognize that this is an important cause, and in a pandemic, we need to, be socially minded. But, for the reasons we've said before, the patent waiver itself does not do that much, right? You sort of need the companies to be active participants in transferring the tech. Now, why don't the companies necessarily want to do that? Well, they think their patent protection helps them make their money, and they want to make money not just for COVID. They think that a lot of the underlying technology that is patented has other commercial purposes, for example, oncology drugs.
Rachel, this is a really good point, because also this is not a new debate. It hasn't happened just because of our global pandemic. If you waive patents now, couldn't you waive patents for the future, and then they wouldn't be big pharma anymore? They'd be little social pharma, and they don't want to be that.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. And, I think one thing to keep in mind about the entirety of the debate is we're having a debate over COVID vaccines, but on both sides of the debate, the activists and advocates that want to waive patents and also the pharma companies that are very much opposed, they're seeing a bigger picture of the overall pharmaceutical development and sales model, what this would mean for the future. So we're playing this out in the battlefield of COVID vaccines, but it has much broader implications especially for the most vocal on each side.
So here's what I want to do, because we're sort of at this impasse right now. There's the global pandemic need of citizens around the world, particularly in developing countries. There's pharmaceutical companies who don't necessarily want to give away their patent or even just temporarily do that. What are the solutions? We talked to people who were very concerned about this issue. This is what they told us.
Firms can be compensated for their research and development efforts and also for actively sharing their knowledge with others who can help produce what is needed. The idea that global health will somehow be impaired in the long run by what is done to protect it best in the short run is fundamentally misguided, both in terms of reasoning and values.
We absolutely have to allow countries like India to develop a generic vaccine because it will make it more affordable to the poorer countries. Currently, the rich countries are hoarding most of the vaccine supplies due to its cost and intellectual property controls. We have to remove those to create a truly people's vaccine.
Madhavi, what are the solutions? What could be the solution? Because South Africa and India proposed this waiver. This was in October, and now here we are in March, and nothing has been decided yet. What else can we do?
Well, it really saddens me to hear that we might have to incentivize these companies by paying them to share their knowledge in the midst of this once-in-a-century pandemic. In fact, it's so important to note that they didn't really put themselves at risk, that because in this particular case, it really was the U.S. government's tax and taxpayers' money that paid for this development, manufacture, and distribution, that we own the vaccine. This is the people's vaccine, and it's not about somehow sweetening the deal. But really, the U.S. government, the Biden administration, just has to step in and use its leverage to force the, not just, waiving the patent, but sharing this technology and teaching the technology globally and working with our partners through the World Health Organization. So many partners are standing at the ready. And we just have to be able to say no to the pharmaceutical companies in this particular case. And this isn't new law. It's been around for 20 years.
Dr. Anand, I'm just looking at the title of today's show. Can India solve the world's COVID-19 vaccine shortage? Can India?
Well, India can play its role, but listen, this vaccine will not be a people's vaccine till it actually reaches people, right? And people are not just living in high-income countries. People live all around the world. As Madhavi said earlier, this is a pandemic. We are all interconnected. As long as any of us is at risk, all of us will remain at risk, even if you've gotten 2 doses of your vaccine in any country. So I think we need to recognize this as a global issue. It has had huge implications on economies, on the way we live our lives. The sooner we are able to address this pandemic and nip its spread, I think we will be able to, have much better lives globally. And I think we need innovative solutions. If that requires us to look beyond patents and look at how we can do tech transfer faster in a way that is more equitable, we need to get onto that table and make that happen. We cannot be waiting for another few months for these kind of discussions to be dragged off. We need those solutions to be happening over the next couple of weeks.
Rachel, from your perspective, can you see where the way forward might be?
So I take the point that it is discouraging to think we need to pay or sweeten the pot for pharma to do the right thing. But I do think we need to be pragmatic and practical in how we think about what's going to compel the kind of actions we need, which is, as we all agree, both the intellectual property leeway for countries to other companies to produce this either under a license or through a patent waiver, and the know-how transfer, the tech transfer. So to me, I see a combination of carrots and sticks here. So the carrots are helping to line up additional deals, find the manufacturers that could help scale things up, that could be licensed, create that open offer, do some of the vetting around the production capacity. And the stick is as the other guests have said, the threat that we could use compulsory licensing, which is a form of taking a patent that's already allowed under current law.
Thank you. Rachel's got many more solutions, but I'm just going to say, Rachel, thank you. And Madhavi, thank you. And also, Dr. Anand, thank you very much. You can find all of them on Twitter. You can just have a look here. Rachel. Excellent. Dr. Anand. and Madhavi. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.